A few theories exist that say life from outer space or other planets depicted in media was the government's way of preparing us for what was out there, making sure in an indirect way that we had a fighting chance. But I think it's fair to say that nothing could have prepared us for what descended from the hungry void of space. We should have perhaps noticed it when bizarre movements in the political world started to take place, satire characters rising up to take power, and experiencing very little opposition, as if they simply were not there to be elected anymore. Peculiar heat waves noted the start of their arrival through the atmosphere, the heat of their entry bouncing off the planet below. Long-range satellites and early warning systems, aided by the integration of artificial intelligence, could not make sense of their biological makeup, as unlike most stories of life from across the stars, these beings were entirely natural in body. I will do my best to describe what I can see here. In the early scientific findings from what we were able to chip away when our militaries first engaged the creatures after first contact failed, when our guns fired upon them, there were no shields. Each shell and explosive found its mark. But when the jelly-like fragments slapped into the ground below, moments later we could see that glistening new flesh had already started to fill the spaces. When examining the chunks, we could see that it was similar to some species of jellyfish on planet Earth. When injured, they can revert to a younger state to avoid dying, and clearly these pieces of them that had to go through this transformation matured at an incredible rate, explaining, I suppose, how they were able to survive entry through the atmosphere without a shield or craft. Their outer layer simply was burnt away, and then almost instantly replaced by a fresh new one. The creatures themselves each towered 20 or 30 stories high, topped with a bulbous head-like structure that followed no real symmetry and seemed to float, always with 5 or so long thin appendages touching the ground. Perhaps some kind of gas in their internal systems allowed them to maintain flight, but not enough to rise any higher. In a way, much like humans, we're naturally high up on land, but only as high as the land beneath us allows us to be. Using skin-thin fins that moved as if underwater to flap and steer the creatures in the direction they wanted to go. My first sighting of them came a little while after first contact, and as I understand it, for an hour or so once the creatures touched down, they stayed stationary, their fins slowly flapping, but no movement in any direction. Then, all at once, they started to drift in the direction they were facing. I was woken up at around 10 a.m. after a long night shift by something heavy being dragged over my roof. I had a sea view flat along Wellington Crescent, and by the time I was finally out of bed and at my window, the cracking and scraping sounds had stopped. But what hung on the other side of the curtains brought an intense sensation of unease over me, to say the absolute least. What I could make out looked like the shadow of a man, seemingly attached to a long piece of material that lightly fluttered in the morning breeze. I could hear what sounded like distressed moans, and the head seemed to be moving back and forth. Before whatever it was moved too far away, I plucked up the courage and yanked aside the curtain and wished, in that moment, I had not or simply stayed asleep. What hung before me on a thick piece of tape-like flesh that had veins running through it that pulsed with the movement of fluid through them was what was left of a middle-aged man, his hands reduced to stumps along with his legs, the underside of their jaw melted away and their tongue dangling uselessly from what was left of their mouth. As the drifter continued its course away from the window, the man's flesh snagged on the balcony railings. When they came down from the roof, they must have been partially speared on the ornamental spikes that, in part, make up the balcony railings, pulling and tearing until, with a great pull, the man was ripped away from the railings, and in doing so, the skin and flesh around their stomach was torn asunder as well, causing their digestive system, partially digested food and blood, to cascade to the ground. Naturally, upon witnessing this, I was violently sick, and it took some time until I was able to bring myself to come back to the window, let alone go outside. My escape journey took me up the High Street and onto Chatham Street. My hope at the time, before I gained more understanding, was that these creatures must have come from the sea, and my safe bet was to get to higher land. But once on Station Road, I could see that this assumption was just that. At least 3 more I could see approaching from inland. I'm not quite sure how long I was running, or how many people I happened across on the way. I do remember, however, the huddled families in doorways, and when the creatures were close, a sweet scent in the air. As the hours melted into days, I remember seeing less families, but with that, the sweet scent getting stronger and stronger. A correlation that I was yet to realize. Something else I had not realized at the time, and had 100% put down to their journey over the roof and the injuries caused by my balcony, was what had actually caused the loss of limbs and the partially missing jaw of that unfortunate soul. I'm sure you may have some inkling of what fly tape is. Well, imagine if a creature could have a hunting technique exactly like that. Limbs that give off an almost hypnotic scent that are also extremely adhesive. Those who are hungry or blind may head towards the smell, and should the creature be hiding behind a building, as it dragged its way over and the limbs slumped down upon them, it would be far too late. However, unlike the fly tape that simply traps the flies, thinking back to my first encounter, the tape-like appendages must be laced with some kind of digestive acids. As the prey is stuck, the liquids slowly eat away at the flesh and bone while the prey is still alive. This would explain the vein-like inners that I saw during my first encounter, most likely extracting the liquidated body parts and then taking the nutrients around the rest of the body. The creature, as they traverse the once safe landscape of our world, travel entirely silently, and many who studied the creature during the early days of their invasion suggested that they may even be blind, their course seemingly entirely random, and despite people being near them, they never changed their direction to try and capture them. Well, entirely silent other than the screams and cries of the people they have already ensnared. Had I been down there, I may have witnessed my fellow humans' resilience and a mass culture change, possibly to a society that remains almost permanently on the move in order to avoid the drifters. Retirement homes could have become a banquet hall, just waiting for their customers to drift by and claim the feast. Too slow or sick to make a run for it. Yes, I imagine that may well have been what it would have been like. Strange, really, now that my body has gone into shock. I can truly be alone with my thoughts. Although you don't know how much you'll miss your arms and your legs and indeed part of your jaw until they are melted away. But I must say the view up here is simply breathtaking.